What possessed you to say, I want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro?
I feel like it tapped me on the shoulder. I had no idea. I was out for an off-road hand cycle ride. I went up and then I came back down, and this thought popped in my head: you need to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And I knew about Mount Kilimanjaro. I mean, sort of Hemingway kind of thing. I had friends who had climbed it, this kind of stuff. But I'd never considered climbing it. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, well, let's see if we can do it. Something that other people hadn't done yet.
Welcome to the next episode of Grit Rising. Two sponsors today. One, Entrepreneur Magazine, who's always our sponsor, where you go to start, grow, and run your business, and Symetra Benefits. And Symetra Benefits is taking a deeper look at how they're paying claims and making sure they're really partnering with their clients, their brokers, to make sure that when something goes wrong, they're there when you need them the most. So excited to be doing this. Have a very special guest with me, Chris Waddell, today. Came out from Park City. It's too many accomplishments for me to name, so I'm going to have Chris introduce himself and then get into it.
So U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee Hall of Fame, and 13 Paralympic medals. Climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in a hand cycle. Some of the stuff that kind of awes me, like I was one of the Dalai Lama's unsung heroes of compassion, which is pretty cool. Sort of to be in his aura for a moment, you're like, okay, this is what happiness is like. Funny enough, People Magazine, I was one of the 50 most beautiful people in People Magazine, which
obviously
more. Thank you, very nice of you. Did more for my ability to make a living as an athlete than I think all the medals that I won. So, and still gets the oohs and ahs whenever I'm introduced anywhere. They're like, oh, okay, that stuff's interesting. People Magazine, really? So anyway, that's the way life goes.
That's how we are these days, right?
It is.
Tell me, how many medals?
13 Paralympic medals.
That's incredible.
12 in the winter. I raced wheelchairs in the summer as well. So one 200-meter silver medal from Sydney in the summer. Yeah. Being from Long Beach, Jim Knob is a legend here on the wheelchair, and we just recognized him at the Century Club last week. So that was cool. And then you mentioned being inducted with Giancarlo, which, being a track guy, that's special to me. So those guys were amazing. That was '68, which was the year I was born, right? Mexico, and it took them that long. I mean, I think they should have been in long before I was. So,
pretty special moment. Everything you've gone through, what are you most proud of?
The Kilimanjaro thing was a big deal because it was about a lot more than me, right? I felt like, I had a debilitating accident. I had a skiing accident back when I was in college, and I joined a group I had no desire whatsoever to join. But the problem is you end up becoming an advocate for that group, and you're trying to I was trying to affect the life of a 20-year-old kid, but 15% of the population is disabled. In a lot of ways, it's an invisible part of the population because we're taught not to stare when we're little, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can't stare, you can't appreciate, you can't ask questions, you can't see somebody for who they really are. And so I think that was what I did as an athlete, but then climbing Kilimanjaro, we're all climbing a mountain. And so understanding the nature of climbing a mountain and how difficult it is to climb a 19,000-foot mountain in a hand cycle, that job is a little bit harder in some ways than you climbing it on your feet. And so hopefully it's also that universal part of, it's part of the reason you're doing this, I would imagine, is we have to learn from each other. And if we don't learn from each other, we're doing ourselves a gigantic disservice.
That's incredible. What possessed you to say, I want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro?
It was a thought that totally bubbled up. I feel like it tapped me on the shoulder. I had no idea. I was out for an off-road hand cycle ride. I went up and then I came back down, and this thought popped in my head: you need to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And I knew about Mount Kilimanjaro. I mean, sort of Hemingway kind of thing. I had friends who had climbed it, this kind of stuff. But I'd never considered climbing it, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, well, let's see if we can do it. Let's see if that's something that could be revolutionary in some way, right? That it's something that other people hadn't done yet.
How long did it take?
Well, it took 6.5 days up, a day and a half down, but it took 2 years to get there. And that's where you really think about quitting. We went 2008, 2009. The economy was pretty pretty difficult at that time. Trying to raise money was a challenge. And so that's what was really hard, was you start with this idea, and you start with this idea that, hey, we're gonna change the world. We're gonna do something that's absolutely great. We're gonna gotta plan like a red carpet speech for the Oscars and this kind of stuff. And obviously those are the dreams that get you started.
Yeah.
And the reality is that, yeah, you're slugging it out. And I went from being effectively a lone wolf kind of thing. I was an individual sport athlete, to then managing people and trying to figure out budgets and all of this stuff. And it was a big challenge to develop the vehicle. And I was involved in everything. I was not doing everything by any means.
That's crazy. And all of that, you're training. And training in a different way than you've ever trained to be able to do it.
Yeah. So illustratively, my arms were actually an inch smaller in circumference than they were when I was racing wheelchairs. So it wasn't this sort of ballistic kind of anaerobic kind of thing. It was really aerobic. I had to turn myself into an engine, and it was just a matter of maintaining RPMs, and you kind of roll over things as opposed to taking each rock or whatever it is as its own little challenge, right? And trying to overcome that one thing. It's kind of like you just have to RPM and just roll right over stuff and keep it going, because then the heart and lungs can recover, whereas those muscles, once you blow them up, there's no bringing them back.
That's crazy. When you're training for that and you're going through like diet, nutrition, getting ready for the altitude, doing the training, what was like, and then managing budget and all that, what was the part that made you say, what am I doing the most? Like, what made you want to quit the most?
Oh, it was the money that made me quit the most. It was really, it was just one of those, we had signed a deal with a company, right? Their last deal, they ended up, disbanding the company, and we never got the budget that we were looking for. But it always seemed like funding was right around the corner, and you're chasing this dream, and assuming that funding is right around the corner. So then you're spending money that hasn't really been, it's the whole, it's got to come in from this side to be able to go out the other side, and there wasn't anything coming in. And so the financial part is always the gigantic stress of just, how are we going to do it? And I'm looking at, sort of personal bankruptcy, going, okay, do I lose my house? Do I do all this other stuff? That was the big challenge. The physical part, I felt like climbing the mountain was the easiest 2 weeks that I had, because all I had to do was just pedal for 6 to 10 hours a day.
It's so crazy. There's so many sports that we see on TV every day where the contracts are gigantic, and what people hear and all that. And being a distance runner, not the sexiest sport, and doing what you're doing, like, there's so many athletes that are training so hard that maybe get every 4 years, or this one climb, this one time, that literally bankrupts themselves to do so, or close to it. It's not something that there's a whole lot of rate of return for a company to say, like, oh, I'm going to give, you're the next Tiger Woods. It's like, it doesn't happen.
No, and that's the case for most sports, right? The whole idea of, the amateur athlete, the Olympic, Paralympic ideal of like, oh, you're in it for the romantic view of the sport, and you want to perform, which makes sense, and I think we're all in it for the sport.
Yeah.
We're not, if you're in it for the money part of it, it seems like it cheapens the pursuit to a certain extent. But at the same time, you've got to be able to pay the bills, right? I don't want the money part to be the primary pursuit.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice to get paid so that you can continue to do what you're trying to do. And, you got to start these things with the idea of like, you're going to do something that nobody's ever done. Like, that's the objective. You're not saying, I want to be pretty good and I want to get paid. It's like, no, I want to do something that changes the way people look at things.
Yeah, it heard something like the Kilimanjaro, just the permit alone is like $15,000.
It was, I don't even remember now. Because we did so many permits, because we were doing the permit to climb the mountain, then we're doing permits to film on the mountain, because we did a documentary film, One Revolution documentary. It's on Amazon Prime now. And because I felt like if you don't tell the story, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And when I was competing in the Paralympics, we weren't on television. It's now thousands of hours on NBC and on streaming on Peacock, et cetera, et cetera. But even as recently as London in 2012, NBC was doing, I think, 3 to 4 hours of coverage on the Paralympics.
Yeah.
I mean, it's grown so much, so if you don't tell the story, it didn't happen. And so, yeah, looking at all of those permits, and then, you know, and there are those challenges too that I think as an American, the assumption is that you are rich, and we are relatively rich, but we were scraping by too. I'm like, oh, every little bit was a huge hurdle for me.
Yeah. You mentioned the story. Take us back a little bit to your story and how the accident happened, how you got to where you are. Like, share a little of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I grew up as an athlete. It was my medium, you know. It was the way I saw my life. It was the way that I saw people in my life. They were, you know, the heroes that I wanted to be like. You know, and so I did everything as a kid. Ski racing was probably my primary sport, and I was ski racing in college at Middlebury College in Vermont, and really just, you know, wanted to figure out how good I could be. You know, this was sort of the end. I saw it as the end of my athletic career, that when I graduated, then I'd be grown up and I'd go do whatever grown-ups do. I still haven't figured that part out yet, but I'd go do whatever grown-ups do, and I wanted to prove to myself. I wanted to be able to be armed with that knowledge as I left college. And so I was pursuing it, and my first day of Christmas vacation, I went home. And you go to the mountain where you'd grown up. So my brother and I went to that mountain, met up with a few buddies, and we took a couple of runs before we were going to train. And in the middle of a turn, just a you know, innocuous seeming kind of thing. I wasn't going very fast, but I walked out of my ski, just pre-released, and ended up falling in the middle of the trail and broke 2 vertebrae. And so that changed things, but it also, you know, the mindset in some ways didn't change, in that as an athlete, in order to be successful, I had to solve the problems that were in front of me. That was how I was going to be successful. Suddenly I had a much bigger problem than I had anticipated, because, you know, I couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't do anything. You know, went from 175 pounds down to 125 pounds, and, you know, just lost all strength, lost the ability to be independent, was effectively like a baby in a lot of ways at 20 years old, and then had to start over. But, you know, it's also kind of a gift in a lot of ways, in that I had 20 years of experience and knowledge, and then I was starting over. And so this is that idea of, you know, kind of you have to die and then the phoenix rising sort of thing. And you go, okay, well, I'm going to use this. I'd ski raced for 15 years beforehand, and I was like, I know what I'm supposed to do. And I want to get into this, and I want to figure out how I can do something that people haven't done. You know, it wasn't necessarily just I want to be the best in the world. I wanted to stretch people's imagination, which was on the athlete side, but is also on the disability side, right? Where, you know, by definition, disability means less.
Yeah.
And so you go, okay, but that's easy enough to attach to just about any human being. Like, we all have the reasons why we can be diminished, but can we figure out how to utilize what we have and be successful with it? That, to me, those are the people that I want to follow. That you go, oh, like, you know, like Spud Webb or something like that, you know, like 5'5" or whatever, and dunking in the NBA, and you go, well, that's pretty darn cool, you know, to see some guy who's not supposed to be here, who's really amazing.
That's an incredible outlook. But at 20, when that happens, to whatever time period that like people a lot of times have something that traumatic happen to them, and they say, like, why me? How could this have happened to me? You know, it's easy, it's almost impossible not to be a bit of a victim, because you are a victim, right, to circumstance. How long did that take, and how did you get out of it? Or how would you recommend somebody that may be sitting at home being like, you know, this has happened, this has happened, this has happened, and then they listen to your story and they go, fuck, I can do more than I'm doing, right?
Well, we all can, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way it works. The victim part, I think, was the scariest part for me, because the victim part was letting go of any of my sense of power and autonomy. And so I really, like in the hospital, I couldn't be a victim because that life that I saw around me in the hospital could be my life moving forward. And so I was petrified to be a victim. I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna keep pursuing. I'm looking forward. It was harder for me to retire from competitive sport than it was to break my back. And this is, I'd proven that I could be the best in the world at something. I was successful enough to be in the Hall of Fame. And you're like, okay, well, there's just the next thing that you do, and there was no sort of horizontal step. I was in, suspended adolescence until I was 36 years old, right? I'm an athlete, and it was like, what do I do next? How am I going to be as passionate about that as I am about this? How am I going to have that sense of purpose? And I think that it really ultimately came down to, a couple of things that were really important. One is having a goal that was bigger than me, myself. And that's where we came to the Kilimanjaro thing was, can I leverage some of the success that I've had, some of this exposure that I've had to draw some attention, not necessarily just to me, but to a population that is underestimated and really represents that human journey that we're all on, because our human journey is that we have some sort of a challenge that we meet, and how we meet that challenge is ultimately what we have to contribute to the rest of the world, right? So if what I'm doing, like climbing Kilimanjaro, could affect somebody that comes in to interview with you, comes in and the way that you see somebody who's coming into, and you're like, all right, I'm not looking at the limitations. I'm looking at like, what do you have to offer? What's different about what you have that's going to help my business be a better business?
Yeah, with the podcast we talk a lot about grit, and it's so unique that it's almost like what you described in that hospital is fear of failure.
Yeah.
More so than in that hospital, it's probably impossible for you to think, I'm going to win 13 medals and climb Kilimanjaro and all those things. But what inspired you in that moment was looking around and saying, like, I can't be like that. I
can't give up. No,
I can't give up.
No, and it really, in as much as anything, it was I wanted to be human. I wanted to be a peer. So like my greatest day of skiing is not winning a medal.
Yeah.
My greatest day of skiing, after graduation, I moved to Vail. And it was my breakthrough year. So this is 1993. It was my breakthrough year when I went, oh, okay, now this makes sense. And I really pretty much rose to the top of the world at that point and beat these guys that I never thought I would beat and everything. And you go, wow, okay, like this is really cool. My old team from Middlebury, the national championships, the NCAA championships, were at Steamboat. And a couple of my old teammates lived in Vail. And so the team came, my brother was on the team, and we had a day of skiing. And it was like 26 out of 28 days. It had snowed in February. This is the beginning of March. It was a full bluebird day, but there was a ton of snow. And this was sort of crud in the back bowls and everything. But it was a great day. And I think my head coach, who was a guy named Bart Bradford, who was the guy who orchestrated getting me my first monoski and having me continue as a member of the team in a monoski when I was more of a liability than anything else. He kind of like hung back behind me, and then after the first run, he's like, "All right, like we're cool. Like this is it. Like I don't have to play caboose. I don't have to pick you up." And I was a peer that day, and I think that in the hospital, that's what I wanted, and I think that's ultimately what we all wanted. Feel like we can be in a position where we can contribute, where we're taken, where we're valid, where we're whole, we're worthy, that kind of thing. And so that's really ultimately kind of how I was looking at it was, I need to be human. I need to be able to say, this is what I want to do, and have that be a realistic pursuit.
You talk about that validation. Oprah has talked about every show she's ever done, no matter who it was, Bill Gates or whoever, whatever success they had, their first comment's always like, how was that? Like, how did I do?
Yeah.
You'd think they would have all this confidence, and they're always stressed about like a look for validation. And in today's world with social media, people get validation in a whole lot of different ways. But that internal validation of, hey, I just got to ski with my buddies that day, and I got to be but be normal, if you will.
And just be one of them. Yeah.
Be one of the guys, and that's a pretty special thing.
It's a pretty special thing. I mean, you talk about the validation. That's a challenge. I mean, I do a lot of speaking. I'm in front of a group, and some of my stuff, and oftentimes I wish that it was more like one-liners the whole time, because then if people are laughing,
yeah,
then you're like, okay, we're getting something here. Or some of my stuff's a little bit more thoughtful, and you're like, is that the look of them thinking, or is that the look of them being bored? And it gets really hard. The validation of it up front. You're going, did it hit? Did it land? Did it resonate with you? Which we really should be able to know that for ourselves, to say, I worked hard. I gave it exactly what I wanted to give it. I gave it that energy, gave it what it deserved. But at the same time, I think it's hard to separate ourselves from the validation, from needing that.
Yeah. Well, and then when you think about racing, when somebody puts a medal around your neck and you just won, like, there it is. It's there for the world to see. Validation from what we do on a daily basis is little bit more subtle. So much of that internal validation, so much of that internal confidence has to come from within. So what do we need to do to get to that point? I think something that you touched on that's unique, even at 48 years old, you said, when we're kids, we're taught not to stare or whatever. I think most people even today don't know how they should act. What's your advice on that?
I think that part of it, a lot of it's about intention, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, can we be genuinely curious about somebody else? It's hard because as human beings, we often see the differences as opposed to what we share.
Yeah.
And if we look at something that we share, one of my greatest compliments in skiing, we were training in Vail one time, and the Pro Tour was in town. And my coach had skied on the World Cup with a bunch of these guys who now were skiing pro. So they skied in our course, and I'm waiting for my turn to go. And there was a Swedish guy behind me, and he said, I like your turns. And I was like, well, I like your turns too,
Yeah.
But it's like, that's a compliment, That's like, all right, this is legitimate. But that's what we shared. He and I shared this pursuit of making the great turn. That's why you get into ski racing. You're in search of that perfect turn. You never really get there, I don't think, but you're in search of it. And so that's really ultimately looking at the conversation. Can we be curious? Can we ask a question and be able to get an answer and not have a preconceived notion about what that answer should be?
Yeah.
Of like, okay, I know what you're saying, or whatever. And, because even just as much as like, hey, do you need help? And I'm like, no. And actually, like if I'm putting my chair in my car, people ask, can I give you a hand there? And I'm like, really? And really, it would take me longer to talk somebody through helping me with my chair than it would to put my chair in the car.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't really have time to kind of talk you through this. But it's genuine, and it's nice that they're asking. But I think it's also, where there's so many differences in the world, and we've become so polarized. How can we connect with somebody on that passion, on that, like, whatever makes them tick, as opposed to like, oh, you're different about this. Tell me about your difference. And it's like, I don't know that we don't want to get hit with the difference over the top of the head,
That's that balance, 1 minute your favorite day is skiing where you feel like everybody else, and at the same time, you don't want to be ignored too, right? And so that's that unique balance. I think, to your point, I started this podcast based on curiosity. Like, there were so many conversations. Well, for you, whether you're on a chairlift or you're whatever, there's not your phone in your hand, there's not distractions. And so some of my best conversations have been on a run.
Yeah.
Best conversations are on a chairlift with somebody where you're having a conversation and there's not 8 million different distractions coming at you. And in those undistracted conversations, the curiosity can come out, because you're past the where do you live?
Right.
Figure out the location.
What do you do?
What do we have in common? But really, what makes you tick? And so, I guess my next question is, sitting here today, what makes you tick?
What makes me tick? I think that it's intoxicating to get better at something. And I think that's skiing was that entree for me. It introduced the idea of the little things can make a big difference, and it's a matter of mastering yourself, mastering your craft, mastering your emotions, these kinds of things, because I think that's the pursuit of being a human being, is trying to figure out, okay, I have a choice in this situation how I want to react, but I don't necessarily, we don't necessarily engage that choice all the time. And there are times that it's just A equals B, and we don't go, hold on, how can I maximize what's happening in this situation? And so I think, I do a lot of speaking, and speaking for me it's trying to figure out how to get better at that. It really is. That's the craft that I'm trying to pursue. My business is speaking, writing, and television, and those provide challenges every single time where I finish and I go, I think I could have done that better. And it's like, okay, well, if you did, what are the next steps to making that happen?
What are the things that irritate you, or like, what are the parts of your day that just make you go, like, fuck, I wish this wasn't happening right now?
I don't encounter much on a daily basis that I can't do.
Yeah.
There's certain things that I don't like the mailbox is one of the ones that I hate.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like, we've got a mailbox that you have to go into and go to your little mailbox and stuff. So I'm like, park the car, take the chair out, jump into the chair, go get the mail, come back out, pull my chair apart, throw it back in the car, and then drive, another, 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it is, and then do the exact same thing again. I'm like, that seems like an incredible waste of time.
Yeah.
That's the one where I really feel jealous of you guys, getting to be able to stand up, walk out, go grab things and come back to the car. But there's not, most things during the day, it's not that there's not much that I can't do, and I'm really lucky in that respect, and I'm lucky that a lot of people preceded me developing the sports equipment, finding their way into races. Like, some of my heroes were some of the people who had to start in wheelchairs in marathons, like all the way at the back.
Yeah.
And one of my buddies, a guy named Jim Martinson, who was one of my heroes, he was out of Seattle area, and he said that he eventually got to the point where he was beating all of the runners.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who I think in his 40s was like a 130, 140 marathoner. So it was one of those, like, he was, and wheelchair racing obviously is faster, but that was, he was legit, within that community as, mid to late 40s kind of thing, which is really impressive. And I'm thankful for those people who made my life a whole lot easier. The Vietnam vets who came back and started a ski program for adaptive skiing, and they started learning how to do it, and had a pile of like limbs that they left at the bottom because they'd take off their prosthetic limbs, and I don't think that they were worried about what people were thinking. They're like, there's this pile of arms and legs at the bottom, but then eventually it was like, I can go faster than you, and it's like, what do you mean you can go faster than me? No, you can't go faster than me. And then that turns into the competition, and I benefited immensely from that, from those guys saying, we're going to figure out a way to have a competition, to have a national championships, to have a Paralympics, to have a highest venue, to be able to compete against the best people in the world.
And that's the physical part you talked about. What about the mental part of like my toughest days are when I feel like I fail, whether it's my teammates, my people that work for me, that we don't do the right job that we promised our clients, whether it's I race and I suck. Some days you go out and you race and you suck. And you know that you didn't leave it all out there, or you had too much of a kick because you were soft in the middle or whatever. Like, those are the hardest days on me. For you, what does that tough mental day look like for you?
A tough mental day. A lot of the stuff that I do is sort of trying to create something out of nothing. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, your heart is involved in what you're trying to do, and your brain is going, you're not the person to do this, and it's like, what? How smart do you think you are? Why, and so fighting that sense of like, discomfort, resistance, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I'm a big fan of what is it, The War of Art? Stephen Pressfield, where it's like that, who that competitor is, the one who's telling you, no, don't do that. Don't do that. And so I think that's a big part. And maintaining the focus throughout that challenge, because not giving in. I have, Teddy Roosevelt is framed in my office. The man in the arena. It's
great quote.
Not the critic who counts. So that to me. I never want to be among those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat. And I look at that and go, that's the person you want to be in your weaker moments, and so that's because there are the weaker moments where you go, I gave in. I gave in to that uncertainty.
Who's your favorite athlete of all time?
Favorite athlete of all time? Wow. I told somebody earlier today that I'm greedy as far as heroes are concerned, that I collect heroes. Wow, favorite athlete of all time. I mean, it'd be hard to get down to some of them, because I look at some of the moments, right? I mean, like Greg LeMond winning in Paris, beating Fignon in that last day when he just, such a short time trial and going and winning the race by 6 seconds or whatever it was. That was an amazing one. Prefontaine is one of those guys that he was a front runner. I mean, that's like, the guy had so much guts just to put it all on the line in 72, got out sprinted in the 10K, ended up fourth, right? And led the whole time. And I think just totally ruined in some ways the mindset of the Finns, who were like, who is this upstart American with the little mustache and stuff like that? Like, I mean, I think he was an absolutely amazing guy. I mean, I'm a baseball guy too. I mean, it's something like looking at like a Greg Maddux, like one of those guys who just so mastered what he was doing and knew this is what's going to happen, and then this guy's going to roll over to shortstop in the third inning because of what I did now. And I'm a Ted Williams fan. I'm from Boston,
Oh, so, got it.
So a Ted Williams fan in that respect. It was the greatest hitter ever, really. And but skiing, I mean, like the mares were on my wall. Ingemar Stenmark at that same time, who was, they were sort of in contrast, where Stenmark was sort of the model of perfection, and the mares were the gung-ho, like we're going to chase it and make it all happen. Watching Schifrin now is absolutely amazing. Bodie Miller was a great guy. Just what he was able to do, and the, I loved what Bodie did in so many ways, because so many of us think, I'm in big trouble, like this is it. I don't think Bodie ever had like that oh shit moment of like, I'm in trouble. He's like, I know, I'm gonna pull this off, like, which is so cool to see that.
So funny for me. Billy Johnson as a kid and the Mayors were so, like, to watch those Olympics and to see what they were doing
in '84, in Sarajevo.
It was so cool, so cool. So much inspiration so far. What question do you have for me?
I mean, so this is a bit of a challenge, right? Because I mean, in so many ways, you've kind of doing this podcast. What have been your biggest challenges in figuring out how to connect with a guest to formulate questions and conversations?
Yeah, I think I learned family friend, mentor in this business. It's funny, Jim Rome was known for, a lot of times for one incident, but he taught. I remember talking to him the first time. He was a gaucho, so went to Santa Barbara, friends with my dad, and Janet, his wife, would talk about how much preparation he would do the night before and the weeks before, and where he could ask questions that he could get real answers from and have real conversations with people. And so for me, the prep is almost as much fun as the podcast itself, because I get to learn people's story in such a unique and in-depth way, and then let my curiosity, like, think about reading a book and then you're like, I want to ask this and this, or you watch an athlete perform, and this allows me to live out that curiosity part of all the research that comes into play. So I've learned and enjoyed so much learning about you and your story, and it's so powerful. And then for you to come in and be raw and vulnerable and help me learn something through that curiosity is just it's what like lifts me up. Like I get excited. Like I'll be on a high all day today because of what I learned today and how I was able to exercise my curiosity. So I'm so thankful for you coming in and sharing your story. Thanks for sharing.